conversations with historian Jack Buchanan about key British commanders of Loyalist troops in America. Hello, and welcome to the Real American Revolution, a multimedia program to discuss with noted authors and historians what really happened before, during, and after America's War for Independence. Now, my name is Randy Flood, and today my guest is historian Jack Buchanan. Jack is one of our nation's foremost historians about the American Revolution and is affectionately known as the Dean of the Southern Campaigns. His books on the Revolution include the prize-winning The Road to Valley Forge, How Washington Built the Army That Won the Revolution, and the widely acclaimed The Road to Guilford Courthouse, The American Revolution in the Carolinas. Also, The Road to Charleston, Nathaniel Greene and the American Revolution, and Jack's most recent book, The Battle of Musgrove's Mill, 1780. Now, today, Jack and I will also be discussing three of the most important British commanders that led American Loyalist forces, those Americans who supported the British Crown during the War for Independence. Episode 1 included John Harris Cruger. Today, we'll be talking about Patrick Ferguson. So, Jack, welcome to the Real American Revolution.
Thank you, Randy. Delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You're certainly welcome. Let's talk about Patrick Ferguson. By way of a little bit of background, Patrick Ferguson was a Scottish officer in the British Army during America's War for Independence. He was an early advocate of light infantry and commander of provincial regulars. That's Americans who were loyal to Great Britain. He was born in Aberdeenshire, Scotland on the 4th of June, 1744. He briefly served in the 7 Years' War. Later, he purchased a command in the 70th Regiment of Foot and was assigned to the West Indies, eventually purchasing a slave plantation in Tobago. He returned home in 1772, where he allegedly designed what became known as the Ferguson rifle, a breech-loading flintlock system. Well, for our first question, Jack, first of all, did Ferguson actually invent the rifle that bears his name today?
No, absolutely not, but it's still known as the Ferguson rifle. It was invented by Isaac de la Chaumette, a French Huguenot who patented the rifle in London. It had one defect. Well, actually, it had more than one defect, but one defect was it fouled easily. So Ferguson, who had a technical bent, corrected that. And he also patented it. Now, whether it should have been patented or not is another question. But he did patent it, and ever after it's been known as the Ferguson rifle. It was the Chaumette rifle. But history is not about what should happen, but what happens.
I certainly agree.
That's one of the myths attached to Tarleton. One of three myths.
The Ferguson, yeah, right.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the Ferguson.
Yeah. Well, Ferguson arrived in America during the Revolutionary War as head of this experimental rifle corps. He participated in the Battle of Brandywine on the 11th of September, 1777, where he was really severely wounded, losing the use of his right arm. Now, there's a story that before he was wounded, he had an opportunity to shoot an American officer whom he could not readily identify. Choosing not to fire at the officer, Ferguson later explained that the officer was riding away, and he used his better judgment to not shoot the officer in the back. The officer could have been George Washington, the general at the time of the American forces. Is there any truth to that story?
There is truth to the story that he was aiming at an officer, but it was not George Washington as he thought. He went to his grave believing that he had spared Washington, but his second in command that day was Oliver P. Delancey, at the time a well-known a New York Loyalist or Tory, as the rebels called them. And Delancey was present at that incident. Delancey had met, conversed, and dined with Washington in 1774. Ferguson had never seen Washington. Delancey said his commander was mistaken, and he repeated that time after time, that it was not Washington. It might have been Count Pulaski.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I
So
know. Go ahead.
that's another myth attached to, because some historians have repeated that story and
Mhm.
accepted it's not true.
Mhm.
It was not Washington.
Well, thank you for busting that myth. We like to do that here at the
Wow.
Real American
Yeah.
Revolution. Now, Ferguson's rifle command was disbanded while he was recovering from his wounds and integrated into the regular British Army. What happened to the 200 or more Ferguson rifles? Now, I know that one still exists in the Museum of the American Revolution, Philadelphia, and I think another one is at the Brandywine Visitor Center outside Philadelphia. What do you think happened to those other rifles when they basically disbanded the Rifle Corps and brought those soldiers back into the regular infantry?
Sir William Howe, who apparently did not think much of them, put them in storage. And what happened to them after that, I don't know. Uh, uh, the rifle it was weak in the stock,
Mhm.
uh, and it really took an expert to use that rifle. It was not a basic infantry weapon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in May of 1778, Ferguson resumed his duties, had fully recovered, and he was under the command of Sir Henry Clinton, and he served in New Jersey for the remainder of 1778 and 1779. But then he was commissioned by Clinton as a major in the 71st Regiment of Foot in October of 1779. That was about the time when the British really shifted their full attention to the South, following the fall of Charleston. Lord Cornwallis, who was second in command to Sir Henry Clinton, developed a strategy to subdue the South and defeat American partisans by recruiting American loyalists from Southern communities to serve with the British forces. Was Ferguson successful at all in helping to recruit American loyalists to implement that strategy?
Well, yes, he was. He recruited loyalist or Tory militia in the South, and finally put together a combined force of those militia men to about 1,000. And he also had with him 70 what we call volunteers of America. These were provincial regulars from the North.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well,
So
in the,
he did put together those. And interestingly enough, he had the same complaints that American officers had about militia. Here today, gone tomorrow. Be in camp, they get homesick, and the next day, officers would go looking for them, gone home.
yeah, the part-time soldiers. Yep.
Right, right.
Well, well, in the aftermath of a stunning and really humiliating loss at Camden by the Americans, things looked pretty bleak for the Americans in the South. And I know that Cornwallis's strategy of subduing the South appeared to be working. That changed, and it changed relatively quickly at the Battle of Musgrove's Mill in August 1780, when American militia won a decisive victory over the British and Loyalist forces in that battle. Now, at the time of Musgrove's Mill, Ferguson was in command of the left wing, the entire left wing of Cornwallis's army, which consisted of American Loyalists who guarded the left flank of the British army to the west. How many troops did Ferguson command at that time, and what was his mission?
Uh, he commanded about 1,000 men, militiamen. His mission really was to put down to overcome the the American militia, the rebel militia. Um, and he didn't have much success in that. Of the some 213 engagements between militia, between loyalist militia and rebel militia, the rebels won an outstanding number of those battles, uh, culminating with the Battle of Musgrove's Mill on August 19th, 1780. And as you say, in which uh, rebel militia forces defeated not only uh, loyalist militia, but provincial units from New York and New Jersey under Colonel Alexander Innes.
Mhm. It's amazing how quickly they responded after the fall of Charleston, and then, of course, after that disastrous loss at Camden, how quickly some of the American militia came back. Now,
Yes.
now Ferguson threatened the folks who were victorious at Musgrove's Mill, and they resided over the mountains in East Tennessee region, basically the over mountain men, as we call them. What did he do to upset them, and what was their response?
He pursued the victors at Musgrove's Mill. Uh, his pursuit failed because his horses broke down, but then he'd always wanted to get into North Carolina. Uh, and uh, Lieutenant Colonel Nisbet Balfour, who was uh, Cornwallis's deputy in the South, uh, always feared that he was going to get into trouble if he got in the. He said Ferguson has such odd ideas, and he was afraid of letting him loose. And in fact, Cornwallis said, "Yes, I fear he may make us some cussed trick."
Mhm.
And as I wrote in one of my books, how prophetic of his lordship, because Ferguson was allowed to go into North Carolina. He went right up to the foot of the mountains and he sent a message over to the over mountain men in what is now East Tennessee that if they did not seize and desist their opposition to His Majesty's forces, he would come over the mountains, hang their leaders, and lay their country waste with fire and sword. And whereupon uh, the men of East Tennessee and also Colonel William Campbell's uh, riflemen from the mountains of southwestern Virginia accepted his challenge, came over the mountains, and we end up in Ferguson's final battle at the Battle of Kings Mountain.
Mhm. Well, many historians view the Battle of Kings Mountain as a major turning of the tide in the South in favor of the Americans.
Yes,
What are your thoughts about Kings Mountain?
I think it was. Well, let me first go back and say, why did he stop at Kings Mountain? He was very close to Cornwallis's lines. He had sent a message to Cornwallis, uh, 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 really asking for aid, for more units to be sent to him. But he stopped at Kings Mountain and camped. And there is a tradition, I don't know if it's true or not, that he was on Kings Mountain, he was king of that mountain, and he would stay there. Uh, anyway, the Over Mountain men in league with backcountry militia. In fact, the backcountry militia at Kings Mountain slightly outnumbered the Over Mountain men. They caught up with them, attacked them at Kings Mountain, killed Ferguson, decimated destroyed his command, really, destroyed his command.
Mhm.
And Cornwallis had just lost his left wing. And it was a turning point, a major turning point in the war in the South.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I know a lot of books are always talk about Saratoga being the turning point and that type of thing. And as we've discussed previously, and with some of our colleagues, that I don't think there's any one turning point. There are a lot of turning points where things seem to break in the Americans' direction and enable them to have an advantage that they perhaps otherwise wouldn't have. But I certainly agree that Kings Mountain was a major, major, major turning point. According to my calculations and research, we didn't win a single major battle after Saratoga for 35 months. There were few things that we were involved with where the Americans were victorious, but there were no major battles won by the Americans until Kings Mountain. And I think that says something about that almost 3
Yes,
year period that
yes.
things really didn't turn dramatically around. So, well, Ferguson has a reputation of being a humane officer. Is that true? And what are your thoughts about him?
Not in my opinion. the British Dictionary of National Biography calls him a humane officer. When he was in the North and under Sir Henry Clinton's command, he sent a series of letters to Clinton proposing that a British force march 50 miles up the west side of the Connecticut River, burning farmhouses, barns, fodder, grain, ravaging the fields, then turning around, coming back down the east side and doing the same thing. In other words, a scorched earth policy. And he also proposed to unleash an Indian war against the rebels. And we all know what atrocities took place when whites and Indians went at each other. This from a man who said, "We came not to make war on women and children." Well, those marches up and down the Connecticut River, that's exactly what they would have been doing. No, he was not a humane officer. That's one of the myths about him.
And that's the third major myth. I know certainly the Over Mountain men had no love for him.
No.
And they proved it. Well, Jack, thanks so much for joining me today for our second episode on British commanders who commanded and led Loyalist troops in America. Really glad to hear your thoughts. Well, thank you
for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, to our viewers and listeners, we've been talking with Jack Buchanan about three of the most important British commanders who led Loyalist forces during America's War for Independence. Today's episode was about Patrick Ferguson, who was killed at the Battle of Kings Mountain, and his troops were decimated, and it was a major turning point in the war, particularly in the South. So my name is Randy Flood. Join us next time for the next episode of British commanders who commanded Loyalist forces in America when we talk about Bannister Tarleton. So long for now.